make the most of it. might be all you get for the year, but we can live in hope, can't we? We usually have a good spell, don't we, at this time, and then it sort of all goes downhill, doesn't it? But anyway, right, bit of news for those who don't know. Eve has fallen and broken a hip, bless her. She had a 5-hour operation yesterday. Oh, it wasn't 5 in the end. Oh, was it okay? But she's okay. She's got it done and wonderful. Be thinking about her, and obviously, if you can visit or do anything to help, then please step up. Because she's such a lovely lady, isn't she, and one of us. I had the incredible privilege of going to visit Jamie's family on Tuesday morning to tell them how much the offering had been. I don't know, do you know yet or not? Okay. It was £1,500, and we as a church has doubled it, put 1,500 in as well. So we've been able to pay the entire funeral costs of Jamie, and also give an extra nearly £700 for the sister who died only 8 weeks ago. You can imagine the tragedy there. It's awful. But what I was going to say was that the incredible gratitude and definite honour that they have for this place is wonderful. And I was saying to Jenny how much we want that to be not just a one-off thing, but where they actually feel that they can be part of us and, be part of the family and actually, just glean some joy and some goodness and the new covenant blessing that we feel that we've come to understand and know. I was talking to their granddaughter, which is actually Samantha's daughter, the one who died. She's only 15, and in all honesty, if we don't get a breakthrough there, she's next in line. And it's horrible to make a statement like that. That is where she's at. She's had an awful lot of tragedy in her life, and it's all manifesting in an incredibly destructive way. And I just really felt the right to sort of take her on board and say, right, come on, what we're going to do to bring you to a place where we can get you through this, because, life is worth living. But sadly, she doesn't see much of hope at the moment. So her name's Taylor. So if you just keep her on your heart, let's, speak some positivity into the heavenly realms. Do some binding of the strong men who's trying to, take away everything that we would like her to have. And, let's really hope that we can turn this around. So please keep her in your prayers. Anth's arrived in Australia. He got there this afternoon. He says 36 hours. It's just way too far, an awful long way. But he's there, and we totally believe that we sow our best, don't we? Barbara was saying we miss him. You're too right, we miss him. But we sow our best, and the openings that he has over there, it's not, your mega churches, although one is a fairly big church that he goes to in Brisbane, on the Sunshine Coast there. That's Gary Mack, who, I don't know whether you remember, he came. So we have a good relationship with them. They aren't quite as far on the journey as we are. So when he goes in there, he can. There's quite a little bit of trepidation when it comes to the minister. What on earth am I loosing onto my people? And it's one of those things where sometimes Anth feels under a lot of pressure, and he has to sort of have a lot of courage and be very brave. The other place he's been going to for quite a while, and it's one of those things that he does on a regular basis. So we're glad that there are people out there that want the good news of the gospel, a more beautiful gospel, right? Do you believe it's more beautiful? Are you more excited now than you've ever been about what you're hearing? I know I've been in this all my life, and I have never been happier than I am now with what I believe, because it's turned from being something that was just constantly controlling and dominating into something that's absolutely wonderful and amazing. And I hope you guys are getting that. Yeah? Liberation, right? Set free. Right. Okay, well, that's a bit of news. Now, I'm going to introduce you to somebody, and I'm giving her absolute free rein to say what she wants and to talk for as long as she wants. Now, I know you weren't expecting that, and neither was I. Sorry? It's a treat, absolutely. But I'm going to introduce you to Ellen Mennel, and how we came to be together tonight is by an absolute miracle. We met on Facebook, and because we are sort of liking similar things and liking similar posts, you get to know what makes each other tick. And to cut sort of not really a very long story, because it isn't that long, is it? I reached out because she was going through something. I don't even know what that something is, but I reached out to say, if you want somewhere to go or come where you can have some respite, knowing that you're in a place where you're safe, then York's the place. So isn't that great? Now, can I just say before she comes, because like I say, I don't know what she's going to say. We've hardly spoken, have we? But I know that you guys will listen and encourage and support, because that's what we're about, aren't we? I was going to say something and I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, what was I going to say? I forgot. Never mind. So, Ellen, would you like to come? And like I say, you can have as long as you like, as short as you like, and then I can pick up or not pick up. Let's just play it by ear. Is that all right? Okay, there you go.
Microphone. Hi. So obviously you can tell by my accent that I'm not from here. So as you know, Facebook does wonderful ways of connecting people and bringing people together. And so when I found and discovered Chris, I had no idea that our journeys actually, in a lot of ways, are very similar. I think yours is more evolved than mine. But for about 6 years now, I have been on an intense deconstruction process from religion. I can't stand religion. I have like zero tolerance for it. So I hope I do not say things here that could be interesting, but if I do, I do. So I've known the Lord now really for about 26 years. And the first 20 were steeped in legalism, and they were steeped in rules, and they were steeped in regulations. And I mean, I bless the man who discipled me. He was a wonderful man, a man of incredible integrity. But I came from a very wild background: drugs, alcohol, abuse, all sorts of things. So the way that he wanted to deal with rebellion was by putting all these laws, rules, regulations all on me. And I mean, I didn't know any better. Okay, I just didn't. And he was also saving my life. And sometimes this is what can kind of happen when you start to get leaders who are very instrumental in your life in God. And so I kind of put him on a very, very high pedestal, that he could do no wrong, see no evil, hear no evil, and that he wasn't ruining me in any sort of fashion, because I was coming off of drugs, I was coming off of alcohol, I was in a very structured discipleship program. I mean, the F word left, all sorts of things. I mean, you name it. What you see right here was very different from where I was. And so I learned about the Bible. I learned how to stand on the Word. I learned how to implement the Word in my life. I learned about faith. I learned about warfare, spiritual warfare. I learned about whole heaps of things, not knowing that some of those things that I was learning were traps for me. And they were traps that led to bondage, greater bondage than even drugs and alcohol, greater bondage than even an abusive past. And I know that can sound very interesting, but I mean, it's crazy how I went from one addiction with drugs and alcohol to another addiction of the fear of the Lord in a way that was like fearful, in a way that was like, oh, I can't, I'm cowering before God. And he talked a lot about sonship, and he talked a lot about being God's beloved. I am his beloved, and the beloved is mine. And I mean, it was fantastic. And I was doing all those fantastic confessions, and I was, standing. But every time, the more I stood, the more I fell. The more I stood in this like pushing battle faith, and I'm an American, and so we do a lot of battle and pushing and faith, but we won't go down that track. But and so what I was doing was actually God was way over here, and I was like trying to get to him all the time. Not that he wasn't inside of me, but we never really focused on that. We focused on how I needed to get somewhere. You need to get to victory. You need to get to wholeness. You need to get to healing. Not that healing was within me, not that I already was living from a position of victory. It was, I'm trying to get somewhere. And so I was always trying to get somewhere. And my whole life was always trying to get somewhere. I was trying to get out of abuse. I was trying to get out of drugs. I just picked up a whole other drug called religion. And I lived it, breathed it, hurt a lot of people with it. I did. I wield a lot of condemnation. I kind of went to, if you want to call it a spirit-filled church, however, if I still say things, sorry, but I'm coming out. So, but I was in a spirit-filled church where there was prophecy and there were all sorts of things, and I did, walk in the gift of prophecy, and I would prophesy, but it was amazing how there would be these twinges of like, God's going to bless you 100%, and it's going to be amazing if you do this, this, and this. But see, I didn't know any different because that was what was prophesied to me. What was prophesied was God has an incredible plan, and you're going to go into these beautiful places, and God's going to use you to set people free. But, the fear of the Lord, maintain the fear of the Lord, and make sure that you're standing in the Word, and make sure. Well, I totally missed the promise of helping bring people into freedom because I was focused on all this stuff I had to do, not be. And so I was a school teacher. And after a while, after God did a whole lot of work in my life and, can't be doing drugs and teaching. So I worked with real troubled kids and troubled youth, and I learned a lot during that time. I learned a lot from them. They learned a lot from me. We were all kind of like learning and teaching each other. I always said I learned more from 16-year-olds than 60-year-olds, and that's no offense to people in here who are 60. But there was an authenticity to them, and there was this ability for them to just be. And they, it doesn't mean that they didn't have issues. They just were like, I'm just being who I am. And I thought, wow, this is very interesting. And as that started to unpack, I left teaching, went into full-time ministry, as you do. Whatever is ministry if we look at it. But so I went into full-time ministry, went into missions because I love overseas and I love other cultures and I love just living and breathing cultures. But in that time, I went through a whole other set of issues because now I was faced with where these principles I had been taught do not work in India. These principles I had taught do not work in Africa. Not that the love of God doesn't work, but some of these principles just didn't work. And I thought, wow, we really, these name it and claim it. I don't, anyway, these name it and claim it stuff that we were doing just, there's more in Africa than people wanting a car. There's, what do you do when the starving person's in front of you? Or what do? You just name for food, like, call in the orange, you can, and that's okay, but at the end of the day, it was like these things were not working. Yeah, and they weren't working for me either. And so I ended up getting married and went through a horrendous divorce. In that divorce, it felt like every religious thing was coming out of me and was coming at me during this process. I lost whole ministries. I lost whole friendships. I lost whole churches because of a divorce. And I married that person because I was taught that to be a reputable woman in ministry, you needed to be married. And that if you were not married, you either had a Jezebel spirit and were running around controlling everyone, or you were a lesbian. So, you were kind of like thrown into these two camps. And it wasn't that maybe for a season it's okay that I'm not married. Okay, but I didn't know these were lies that were there. And so when I got married on this whole bunch of lies, didn't even love the guy. In fact, the wedding ceremony was really between me and God. It wasn't even between him and I. But I didn't know that these lies were here until I was in the situation. And then when I stepped out of it, God began to unpack. Here's what happened, Ellen. Here's why you married. Here's why you did this. Here's what happened. And it was like the most heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching thing I had ever been in my life. I was living in New Zealand at the time, so you're way far away from, anybody I knew, but everybody back home was already against me because my background has a lot to it, and so they assumed I was in my background, and you know how people are, how sometimes we judge and we assume that they're back in their past, but I wasn't in my past. I just didn't want to be married, and I couldn't really explain that very adequately. And so I had to flee to the South Island, and there I was for 60 days because I had to get out of a very abusive, emotionally, spiritually abusive, the whole thing. I mean, I had church leaders coming and telling my ex-husband that he needed to, this is your wife, she needs to submit, she needs to, I mean, it was insane. I had never witnessed something so damaging to my heart. So for the 60 days that I was on the South Island, I ended up finding a random church, which, could appear random in its moment, but it wasn't. Because I walked in the door, and they're very similar to this, going through their whole deconstruction process. And I remember walking in the door, and I just started weeping. We're Americans, we do a lot of emotions. So I was weeping, and this man just came up, and he grabbed me in a big hug, and he said, I am so sorry for, and he knew nothing, okay? He knew nothing about me. I'm so sorry for what has happened to you and the abuse that you have been through, but however long that you're here, we just want to love you. So, of course, I had all my walls up, and I thought, oh, great, here I am in a church, During one of their services, and I was very skeptical of prophecy by then. There was just whole heaps of things were going on. This lovely 16-year-old, I love them. I love youth. And she just came up to me, and she knelt at my feet, and she started weeping, and she said, I am so sorry that New Zealand has almost killed you. Now, she had no idea. And she said, the Lord shows me that you have been almost killed here, and I want to apologize to you on behalf of our nation. So there started this healing process, of like, wow, what is this? Where am I? What's the whole deal here? So to make a long story short, I ended up returning back to the States. I could not return to Pennsylvania, and that was the only place I had really known. I mean, I had traveled the U.S., but I knew a lot of people in Pennsylvania. They didn't want me there. I didn't want to be there. So I thought, where am I going to go? So I went to Wyoming, a place I knew nothing about. Had never been to Wyoming other than it's the cowboy state, and I like rodeos, and anyway. And so I was there, and that's where I learned about grace. And that was only 6 years ago. I learned about grace, and I learned about grace through people who their outworking of their lives demonstrated grace. And they heard my story without a lack of judgment. They didn't have anything. They had really nothing to say other than that they loved me. And because they had no need to control me, they had no need to control my heart. Even if I was believing lies, they didn't have a need to point out the lies. Their whole focus was to love me back into a whole place, to love me back into a safe place. And so I learned about grace in that time, and I'm still learning about grace, and it has been, it's even more better than I thought, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. And even coming to the UK was a miracle that I'm here, actually. And I'm serving a charity down in Totnes, and I'm kind of down there working, and I love that town. I just like weird. But it's a different sort of town, if you probably know about it, and it's just very on the cutting edge in a whole lot of things. And I like where I am, but I don't like where I am. That's being fair and honest. I see religion even in that group, and it's a prophetic group. I seem to get in these prophetic groups, but I do enjoy the things of the Spirit, and I love watching God move and do amazing things. But what I don't like is when things are mixtures. And so I'm starting to sense a lot of mixture. I'm starting to see a lot of mixture. So there was a lot of banging of heads before I even came on this little trip here. And since I've been here, God just keeps unpacking more and more and more about me, and about even that group down there, and just about purpose. I really feel, since this whole thing has happened in my life, that I have a greater sense of purpose than I have ever had in my life. Because a lot of times my purpose was to bring people into the kingdom. This was how it was. I'm going to bring everybody into the kingdom. They're going to get saved. They're going to get delivered. And there's nothing wrong with having those thoughts, because God is amazing. You want to bring people into the kingdom. But there was always a bit of this stuff with it, and there was an identity with it, and there was whole heaps of stuff with it. Now I just don't have that focus. My focus now is him. My focus is the person in front of me. Hi, how are you? God, what do you want me to do for this person today? I want you to mow their grass. Amen. And so I go and mow their grass. And like today, I was in the city of York, and I met some kid from America. I don't know how this happens, but I was in the gardens, and there was this kid, and we meet, and we ended up going out for lunch. And I never said anything about the gospel, never did anything at all in that arena. And I walked away thinking to myself, wow, I had a greater impact with that kid because we got along great. I mean, we just had this amazing conversation. We got to know each other on a human level. We are human, okay? We are spirit, yes, but we are human. And so we're just talking about our trips and where we've been all over the world. And he's like, can we connect on Facebook? I'm like, yes, we can, how this goes. We can connect on Facebook. And then I get on Facebook with him, and I'm looking down his page, and I'm realizing how much he really has a dislike for Christianity and has a real dislike for believers. And I thought, well, this is interesting that I'm in this situation. He's like, thanks for today. That was great. May you carry on in whatever it is that you're doing. And I thought, there's an open door. I didn't have to share anything. I just had to be me. I just needed to be authentic. I needed to not be like, you're my task in front of me to save, because he who wins souls is wise. So I've got to, but there's a way to win souls. It's not, at least is what I'm discovering. It's just not the way that we were always taught. So here I am. I'm here for a week. I'm here with my friend who's also working at the same charity. I have no idea what's going to happen when I return back down there after 8 days. I'll be honest, I don't want to go back down, but God's going to help me. But I know that being here is a divine appointment, and I know that meeting you is a divine appointment. And I am loving God more than I have ever loved him, and I'm realizing how much he never leaves us nor forsakes us, and I don't need to work for his love, and I don't need to grovel for his love, and I don't need to be alter or change or do anything. He does changing however he wants to change, but I feel like I'm coming more into me, really, than another version of something else that I was. So that's my journey.
Thanks for that. What I was going to say when I forgot what I was going to say was this, that what I'm trying to do at the moment is just be available because, when we went over to Salt Lake City a while ago, when you're in a place and you know that God wants you there, but you don't know what the next step is, or you don't know the next door to knock on or who to contact, it can be really quite difficult and very, very lonely. And when Kev came and said, God's spoken to me now that you've got to find a guy called Carl, well, things like that are exciting and they're wonderful because you just think, all right then, we'll knock on that door and see what happens. And of course, you know the story of that, which I'm not going to tell you again now. So all I was wanting to be was that link that if it's helpful, then it's helpful. If it's not, it doesn't matter. We've not lost anything, have we? We've not lost anything at all because when all's said and done, we're wanting, like you say, to build the kingdom. We talked last week about the peaceable kingdom because we've been talking over the last few weeks about war and violence and conflict, and it's been quite interesting. And I brought last week about whether it's actually possible, whether we can really believe for a peaceable kingdom actually here on earth, actually see it with our own eyes. Wouldn't that be amazing? And we were talking about the fact that actually it is here, it is happening, but we aren't seeing it in its completeness or its fulfillment. And actually what we're challenging our hearts to do is be participants in the building of that, not actually adding to the world's pain. And I think it's important to just remind ourselves of that. We're here to contribute and participate in that peaceable kingdom. Well, what else was I going to say as well? Yeah, when you mentioned about addictions, and I was so glad, and that's why we cheered, when you said you went from one addiction to another. I mean, come on. That is the biggest thing that we've had to learn. And if there's one thing that I would put into words very clearly, is that what Jesus came to do was put an end to religion. And what religion did was make another religion out of Jesus. And that's the problem, because all that happened was, oh, come on, we've got this figure, we've got this story, we've got this event, let's make something out of it. And you end up with the same as everything else, just another religion. And I'm sure that God looks down from on high with his Son and the Holy Spirit, and they're absolutely face-palming, absolutely upset at the whole thing, because they're saying, actually, we wanted to shut the door on all that, and all you did was open it wider and get more people in the cage. A lovely picture that I have is about, the bird cage that you put a wounded bird in order for it to heal. But then you don't keep that bird in the cage, you set it free. And if we're not careful, the church becomes just this massive bird cage that the door never opens, it's just shut. And we've encouraged people to come in to find healing, but then instead of them flying out into freedom, and of course this is where it gets paradoxical. You need something for people to come to in order to find what they need. But then if you make it so that it is so suffocating that there is no life outside of it, then it has no purpose. So there's this almost a paradox, and we're going to maybe talk about this a little bit tonight, how it sort of gets a bit messy. But what I believe we should be doing is saying, right, we want a place that reflects the Abba of Jesus, that reflects him in his correct way, not a distorted way, where people can come and hear it, find peace for their souls, find that wonderful freeing experience, but then also find their way to be what they need to be in the world and in the kingdom. Not just, for me, for many, many years, what had happened was that I didn't even know how to function in the world at all. I just didn't know what to do. And it was like even school friends, I didn't know how to talk to them. I didn't know what their likes and dislikes were. I didn't know what they did. It was like, I am separate. And that word separate that's terrible, isn't it? And you know where we've got that from? And I have totally digressed from all of this, so we'll see what happens. Where we get separate from is this whole thing about God being holy. So he wants us to be a holy people. And so it's about us separating from the world and being different. But the silly thing is, the word holy actually only means different. It means different than. Because the opposite of that is same as. Do you get it? It's very simple. So when we're a holy people, we are different, but we're not separated from, in the sense that we have no relationship or ability to talk. We're different. And I loved what Anth was talking about at Easter, when he brought the fact that the reason why God is holy is not because he's moral perfectionist and is cracking the whip to make sure everybody's perfect. It's because he's different. Just simple as that. It's different. Now, how different? He's not like any other God. Now, you'll say there aren't any other gods. Oh, there's been plenty, because we create them all the time, right? But he's different from any other God because what he demands is different. But what did we do? We made him the same as every other one. And of course, we could keep talking on that and reiterating what we've come to understand about the fact that he's not a God that needs to be appeased. He's not needing sacrifice in order for you to be brought nigh unto him, because you've never been away from him. Isn't that amazing? So we know that, and these are the things that are very incredibly blessing on our lives, aren't they? Right, what am I going to talk about? I really felt that I should talk about reward and punishment in the sense that when we're talking about God not being the same as, you've got to put it in that framework that all the other gods, etc., operated on that criteria. Think about it. You're rewarded for good, you're punished for bad. And so we have in religion, in the sense of the common narrative, is always banging that drum. It's reward for good, it's punishment for bad. And Ellen was quite correctly saying that you come in and it's supposed to be whom the sun sets free is free indeed, but then all of a sudden you're not free at all, because there's all this stuff that we have to do in order to qualify and in order to be good. Because something also that you were saying, when really things went bad for you in your marriage, etc., isn't it interesting that the church as a whole, and I don't want to be critical of right across the board, they find that they don't have the grace and the kindness to deal with trouble, because they're looking at their criteria and they're saying, this is outside, you've done wrong, you've done bad, therefore you must do this. Because the situation and the criteria is still reward for good, punishment for bad. So we haven't got a holy God who is different. We've actually got an unholy God who is the same as. I hope this is making sense. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about a little bit was unrewarded good. Now that's an interesting word. Because what I have actually found is that once you, even in the context of understanding grace, you can find that what comes across in the church, and especially in progressive churches, you get the what's the point attitude that's almost like, well, if there is no reward for good and there is no punishment for bad, and especially once you go into the universalist type of thinking that when you say it is finished and that God was in Christ reconciling the whole world to himself and it's done, you think, well, then what's the point? So does it prove a little bit that we all like to be rewarded for good, and we all like others to be punished if they're not quite as good as I am? So I wonder if it's possible that we can actually get to a place, and it's a little bit attached to what I was saying a few minutes ago, of coming to a place where we do everything that we do, not out of a sense of a reward that's coming, but just because we want to do what is good and what is right, because it's the right and good thing to do. Does that make sense? Now, I feel that at times, what I am sensing is that there isn't that attitude. So, for instance, we're quite happy to get rid of hell. And I mean, some of you may not have got rid of hell yet, but I mean, we've talked about it. We've talked about how the Bible talks about not hell itself, but the word that has been used as hell describes these, Gehenna, Hades, and Sheol. But what we've created is more akin to Dante's Inferno than it is what the Bible talks about, the rubbish heap, etc., that burns. And again, I'm not talking about that tonight. I'm just trying to fill in some gaps. So we get rid of that, and we're quite happy to get rid of that, although some people aren't. I mean, Ant went into a church in Arizona, and he did a preach on it, and somebody came to him, and he says, "You are not taking away my hail." It was great. It was brilliant. And he's never been invited back since. So there you go. What about heaven, though? You see, if we're not careful, we still talk about heaven as this destination in the same way as we talk about hell as a destination. But we've sort of sorted that. But we're really barking up the wrong tree even with heaven. Because think about it. Even in the common narrative, it's all about coming to Jesus, giving your life to Jesus, him forgiving you of your sin so that you can go to heaven. You see what I mean? So that is the common narrative. Now, what makes me then get to heaven because of that? Well, because I have said I am sorry for my sin, that suddenly makes me good. And those who don't admit that they're sinners are still bad. Sorry, I've got to have a drink. Yeah, I'll have a drink. That's a good idea. I'll have a drink. So then you have to ask the question then, even in our desire to participate and operate in the restoration of all things, the building of this peaceable kingdom, is it about still a reward? If there is no heaven, and I'm not saying that there isn't a heaven, I promise, listen to me, I'm not saying that, but if there isn't one, will and would we still be willing to do what we do? Great question. And the reason why I say that is because I have noticed, and India's been mentioned already tonight, but we went to India a few years ago, and what we found really very, very noticeable was as soon as that you brought any sort of grace message about freedom and about the incredible non-legalistic message and more beautiful gospel, those who had been stuck in legalism for years did not like it because they were almost saying this, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, if my life's had to be miserable up to now, their lives have got to be miserable up to now, or it's not fair. Seriously. And I won't mention any names because it could go out on, online. But it's actually the truth. It was almost like, hang on a minute, you can't now tell them that they can do this and they can do that when I couldn't and my life was miserable. We're saying, but we're telling you as well, you can be free as well. I can't be free. Oh, I can't be free. Isn't it really, really sad? So it's almost like once you preach this wonderful freeing gospel, it almost, and if there isn't this heaven to gain, well, what's the point then? So where am I? Here. We've talked about, I better just clarify this, right? I do believe there is something after this. I don't know what it is. And do you know what's lovely? It's all right to say we don't know. I know that we can read in Revelations about streets paved with gold and diamonds as big as your head and all of that. And I don't know if that's heaven. I don't know if that's what it's about. Because when you think that Revelation, like we've talked about, is more of what was happening in AD 70 and all that was going on then, it's hard to suddenly jump and make that about the future. I don't know. But it's okay to say we don't know. What we do know is that God is great and God is good and God is lovely and He's unconditional in His heart towards us. So it's got to be pretty decent. Isn't that fair enough? And is that okay? But can we do something? Can we stop looking at it as a reward? Because I don't want any of you thinking in terms of this eternal life or this afterlife as something you are getting for something. The reason why you're getting eternal life is because you are a part of God. You're a part of Him. You're going to live forever because He's eternal. And so are you. Because in that sense, we're all connected. And it's back to the subatomic particles, isn't it? You know, when we touch each other, you get more of me than you bargained for. This business about us being so connected is sadly what the church as a whole tends to miss. Because we are so connected. And not just us in here, but with every single being in the entire world. Everything. We're connected to it. So your life hereafter is not a reward for you saying some sinner's prayer. It's because you are eternal beings. Now, isn't that great? Now, I'm going to then go further. Everybody out there are eternal beings and are going to live forever. And we could start talking about all of and we can next week. We might go talk about the sheep and the goats and the wheat and the tares. Just let me go. I love it. Because at the end of the day, we start separating, saying, yeah, but they're going to go there because they're good, and they're going to go there because they're bad. But I can promise you, we've not got that right at all. There's great parables about what's going to happen at the end of the age when the angels come and do all the sorting, this, that, and the other. What we mustn't do now is sort it now. We've got to leave it alone. Because I know what's going to happen. Because if God said that the judging is going to be left to the Son, what sort of judging is he going to do? Just think about that. What sort of judging is the Son going to do? It's going to be pretty awesome. And I'll tell you what, he's going to judge more on the side of acquitted than he is on the side of doomed. And what we a lovely word last week, wasn't it? The peaceable kingdom, we called it the undoomed kingdom. Undoomed. We like that word, undoomed. Okay, so I hope you've got sort of a bit of that in your head. Yeah. New covenant. Jeremiah 31. Love this scripture. It says this, that you'll no longer, a man shall tell his brother, know the Lord, for they shall know him. I think we've got to keep getting that. We're not converting people to, we're actually trying to uncover what's already there. Come on, let's remind ourselves it's already there. And that's what we're wanting to do. And while I say we're not that interested in putting bums on seats, we want a place where people can come and experience that unconditional love of Jesus. Isn't that right? Okay, where am I? Okay. In our effort to find meaning, and we're looking for meaning in everything, aren't we? Have you ever thought about that? Stuff happens and you want to know why. And what does it mean? You know, we have a little upset with our friends and family. Yeah, but why? What was going on there? What does it mean? But I believe that we have attributed to God and Jesus some crazy things. What I mean by that is if you think about the atonement theories, we find a way of taking the story of Jesus, and because we have to make it mean something, we can be a bit daft. I don't know whether you're getting me there, but we can. So for instance, with the atonement theories, you've got this idea that, take for instance the satisfaction theory. You've got this idea that this incredible creator God is so offended by people's behavior that he has a mood, he gets in a mood, and therefore basically says, unless, my offense is taken away, we're not talking. And that to me is trying to find meaning to make us feel better. And meaning is something that I think matters a lot to us all. So for instance, we then make meaning by looking at the Jewish system, and we can see then Jesus, he represents a lamb. Therefore, it fits in with the Jewish system. So suddenly it becomes the Lamb of God, which is the sacrifice for the world. But that we don't realize we're attributing to God child sacrifice, which in the Old Testament, he clearly says, do not do it. You can't do it. So why have we made meaning for a God to be willing to sacrifice his son? I hope you just hear that, because as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, where did we come to accept that was a good meaning? And I think it's because we're all wanting meaning so much, we'll grab it. We'll gravitate to whatever we feel is okay. So in this context of meaning, I want to have a look at Solomon, and I want to look at Job, because what's amazing about those two people, They're about the only two. I know we say David was a man after God's own heart, and he was, but just keep him out the loop at the minute. We're going to talk about Solomon, we're going to talk about Job. These two guys seem to have a revelation that others didn't seem to have. And I found it really quite interesting because you've got Solomon, his outlook on life. I'll just, very basically say, okay, he indulged in pleasure, he amassed a load of wealth, he had loads of influence, he was a powerful political figure, he was a king. Been there, done that. And basically he says, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now what's interesting there is it's the opposite of meaning. No, I find that very interesting. Because what I find that as we look at what he's doing and what he's saying is that he is actually finding meaning when he calls everything meaningless. Now, I know that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, but you'll get what I'm saying in a minute. Basically, Solomon, if it was Solomon that wrote it, I really don't know, but I'm not that bothered either. This was written around the time when the Israelites had been in captivity, and they'd had a terrible time. And of course, they were very low and very down, and the party line at the time, and you can see why I'm linking it into what I was saying at the beginning, the party line at the time is this, that God blesses good, and he rewards bad with punishment. So that's the party line. And yet, you've got Solomon, or whoever wrote this book, he's actually saying, I don't buy that, because he says that basically, when everybody dies, all that's going to happen is death. Now, that is in your Bible. What are you smiling at? Because you've got all sorts of different, and remember, we've talked about this as well, haven't we? About the differing authors of the different books and how they came from different backgrounds with different agendas and motivations. So that's why sometimes you can read one thing in one place and something totally different in another. And that is not a contradiction, because at the time, that's what they felt. And if you don't get that, you're going to be, oh, what's going on here? But you've got Solomon here who's actually saying, do you know what? And when I think about that, he was a bit of a church kid, wasn't he? A bit of a pastor's kid, or a king's kid, you could say. He'd been through all the horror of his father and Bathsheba, in the sense that Bathsheba was his mother. So he'll have known all the horror and all the scandal that went on. You wonder if that had anything to do with Solomon's depressed state. I don't know. But maybe he'd got to the point where he thought, you know what? I don't like the way my family were treated, and I don't like all that went on. So I think, you know what, I'm just going to... But then, on the other hand, he built the temple. Oh, that's another little rabbit we could follow, because you've got issues then where you've got a guy who is used by God to build a temple. His father wasn't, because he said his father was a man of blood, yet he had a heart after God's own heart. We've got all sorts of weird stuff going on there. But anyway, you've got Solomon here who's basically saying, do you know what? The meaning that I find in life, that it's all meaningless, because basically we're all going to die. Life is unfair. Whether you're good, whether you're bad, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're a king or a pauper, whatever you are, the end result is the same. Do you think he was a wise man? I don't know. He's supposedly very wise. He will rot like the rest. Foolish and wise have the same end. And when all's said and done, all he was coming to the conclusion, his life is very unfair. And why was it unfair? Because he'd done all this stuff. He thought he'd been very good, but he recognized that the end result was just the same. Oh, do you think he's had a revelation? I think he has. Anyway, moving on. And at one point he says, do you know what? I hate life. And the reason why I hate life is because the same fate happens to everybody, regardless of anything. Very depressive view. And according to this writer, there is no heaven or hell. It's just the place of the dead. It's the grave. And I'm rushing on because I want to just to finish this. By the time you get to chapter 9, though, he's come to an incredible conclusion. And I've got to actually find it and just read it to you, if you can just give me a second. Ecclesiastes 9. Oh, technology. So he says this at the end, because he's had a right rant, a right moan, he's a right misery, full of doom and gloom. But then he says this, so I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no man knows whether love or hate awaits him. Get this? It's in the Bible. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. So that's a bit like saying whether you're religious or you're not religious, you're going to end exactly the same way. But this is the bit I want to get to, and I think it's lovely, and you'll understand by the end. So he says, so what am I going to do? Am I going to sit in a corner? Am I going to have a paddy? Am I going to absolutely, just lose it all? Or am I going to come to some meaning? And he says this, go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for it is now that God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife. Woohoo, I haven't got one. Whom you love all the days of this meaningless life. I love the way he keeps calling it meaningless, but he's actually finding meaning. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Do it with all your might. I think that's a bit gospel-y, isn't it? Do it with all your might. Moving on. You'll see why I did that in a minute. So, because it's the end, and because he's got this idea, that's it, it's meaningless, what am I going to do about it? Find something that you believe in and do. Okay. Life's not going to last, so at least live it to the full. And I think that that's one of the things that we have got to even get through in this business of, instead of preaching, the heaven, the hell, it's this. Live life absolutely to the full. Yes. See? Because we can be more heavenly minded than earthly good. So I think he had an incredible revelation there, and he turned his meaninglessness into meaning. But why? Because he first of all faced the meaninglessness of it. So let's just move on to this now. Right. The Deuteronomists who were around at the time, and if you remember our study that we did on the Bible writers, their worldview was this: good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, good people are blessed, evil are cursed. And the point was, Solomon was wise enough to know that that was a way too simplistic way of looking at things, and sadly, the mainstream church has picked up that and said, this is it, good things happen to good people, and it just is not the truth. And I know you guys here are with me on that, but just making sure we keep banging that drum. So, and this is often how we want it, until it happens to us. Think about it. So when the bad stuff is happening, we wouldn't want anybody, would we? And please hear me on this. The platitudes and also then the opposite, the rubbish that can be spoken to people in times of crisis is just wicked. It doesn't reflect the heart of God. It doesn't reflect Jesus at all, and that's our job. So Solomon is saying, we're not having this. We're going to challenge their idea, and we're, going to put stop to that. Okay, so now let me talk about Job, if that's okay. Because we often look at Job from the point of view of the test that we've got Satan coming into the presence of the council, which we can't go into that. We've talked about that before. And even then, when people focus on that, they never focus on it properly, because if they do, they have to admit there is a whole council of gods there, and Satan being one of them, which has got to sort your theology out on that, because he's there and he's coming in, and he's not coming in just as a baddie who's encroaching in this place. He's actually part of that council. That's why he's bringing up the charge. He's part of that council, but that's another story altogether. But he finds himself the victim of the most hideous suffering. And we know from the story that he gets a visit from his friends. And isn't that what we've just been talking about? Let's be careful what we say to people who are in difficulty and in trouble, because they were basically telling him that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And what did Job do? He insists that he has done nothing wrong. Now, I have heard people say, well, you see, that was where he was going wrong, because he really, where he'd gone wrong, and remember the word of faith, the thing that he feared had come upon him, that's why all this stuff was. So it was a lack of faith, and he was having sacrifices to make sure that if his children had not done the right thing that day, they were going to be covered. So they make a lot of that. And that's fine. I am not knocking any of that. But I think that what is in this passage is much more exciting, because really he's saying, no, I have done nothing wrong. Therefore, these calamities should not have happened to me if I go by what the common narrative is. I have not done anything wrong. Therefore, I want to stand before God and say, why have you done this to me? I think that's fair dinkum, don't you? I think it is. So he gets his day in court. And, basically the belief is that he has done wrong. That's his friends. And he says, no, I haven't done wrong. And in the end, and I'm not going to obviously go into all of it, but the final result is that they're both wrong in one sense, although Job hadn't done anything wrong, but he was wrong in how he understood the principle. Do you get me? So he believed that because he hadn't done anything wrong, he didn't deserve the calamities because he was a good person. But that's where he was wrong. Now, are you hearing me? Because we believe only good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad. But God was saying, you've both got it wrong, because the truth is, that isn't how the world works. And it's here where Solomon and Job have got the same understanding. Now, Job has to be taken on a journey. He has to be slapped around the head a bit, because he argues, doesn't he? And he's saying, da, 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 da. And the point is, if we really get honest, Job really wants that principle to exist. And do you? This is why I brought up the beginning about unrewarded good, you see. Are we willing? Are we willing? Do you know? Anyway, we'll get onto that in a minute. So, both Solomon and Job had come to the same revelation that the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, actually experience life exactly the same. Now, like I say, Job feels that there should be this principle in place. And I remember Jonah being a bit like that, sat under that bush sulking because he didn't want God to be gracious to Nineveh when he'd gone and preached the word. He said, I knew you were going to save them. He didn't want it, right? Because he thought they were bad. Do you get me? Okay. So we're getting to the point, aren't we? That basically God gets hold of Job and says, what on earth are you talking about? This is not how the world works. There is no simplistic, clean, tidy answers to everything. Suffering doesn't just visit the sinner and blessings only the saint. Basically, good and bad is happening, and it's happening to us all. And then what I found really interesting was the fact that as I'm reading this, I think I've mentioned it before. I read in this little passageway about a guy who had got cataracts on his eyes, and he'd gone out for prayer in a church, and immediately was accused of reading or watching pornography, because if he had cataracts, that must mean he was doing something terribly wrong. How sad. So it's like, that's it, case closed. See how we find meaning? And I hope you're getting why I'm attaching it to meaning, because we find meaning. Oh, cataracts, you must have done something wrong, blah, blah, blah. And so we've made meaning out of it. But in fact, that in itself is meaningless. Let's get it the right way around. That's meaningless. So anyway, let me read this. The fine thing about the world, this is G.K. Chesterton. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this guy. He does some great programs on the TV called Father Brown. Ever seen them? If you ever do it, they're lovely. They really are nice. He says, the fine thing about the world is that it can all be explained, or at least this is what the mechanical optimist believes. But this is now God sees it. He says, if there is one fine point about the world that God insists on, is that it cannot be explained. Now you think to yourself, how is it that God, who is on top of everything, is saying that it can't be explained? What he's really meaning is that he's not going to sit and try and explain it to us lot. He's going to say, leave it to me, leave it to my mind. And so what is wonderful here is in Job 38:28, you've got this wonderful banter between God and Job, and he's asking questions like this. I just wrote a few down. Has the rain a father? Isn't that a lovely question? Has the rain a father? Out of whose womb came the ice? These words are like poetic and brilliant, and of course it goes on for like five chapters where he's absolutely saying, you think you've got it sorted into this simplistic karma-like principle that good get good and bad gets bad, when actually what exists in the universe is something that you can't even understand at all. So here's the point. Did Solomon stop being somebody who decided he was going to find something to do and do it with all his heart because he found out that the world didn't operate the way he thought it should? You got me? And did Job do that? No, he said, I was a righteous man and I will continue to be a righteous man, even though my righteousness doesn't stop these calamities. Amazing, isn't it? So, here's the thing. We can be so tempted to decide that when we've had a raw deal, that we will just pack our bags and not bother and take our ball home. Is that right? But I would say that what we have to do is decide that we're going to be motivated with all our heart and with all our might, even if our good that we're doing is not seen or even rewarded. Hard, isn't it? Yeah. But then, if we're only doing what we're doing for a reward, one could say that proves that you haven't got a centered morality. It's only a morality that is self-centered in the sense of reward-based. So I hope that makes sense. So unrewarded good has intrinsic value only as far as we lay aside the hope of any reward. I think that the moment there is a house, that is where we have really been called. Really do. Because we're doing a lot of giving, a lot of input, and a lot of investment. And most of the time, a lot of it's not even seen or acknowledged. But are we going to keep doing it? We're going to keep doing that. So this is just something that I want to now say. If we're not careful, we make the death of Jesus meaningless rather than meaningful. And I think what I'm going to do, I don't know, maybe it's next week or sometime, to have a look at that. Because we in a desire to find meaning, we can actually attach a distorted meaning. Do you get me? So what had happened with the Deuteronomists was that they had attached a distorted meaning to the reason why they'd been in captivity, and actually were telling lies to the people. Do you get it? In order to make sense of it. So anyway, how do I finish this off? We all want to matter, and we all want rewarding for mattering. That's a good one, isn't it? There was no reward in Solomon's worldview. Everyone was the same, but that didn't deter Solomon. And Job, sometimes we have to watch the wicked prosper. The lazy might be thriving while you're struggling. And in such a world, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But Job, he found meaning in it because he said, I'm going to carry on because this is what the right thing to do is. So these two characters hold to something that is far superior than what most religions have, and that's Christianity included. And it's what I would call this unrewarded good. And let me just finish with this, and it will lead nicely onto the sheep and the goats, because real righteousness, now I know it's a gift in the sense of God's righteousness, but how it can be expressed, and you can have a look at Matthew 25 if you like. Real righteousness is that which we do without any expectation of reward. And that's why we know that we can trust God, because his heart and his actions and his attitude towards us is not because he's looking for reward. It's because he's in it for the duration, because he absolutely dotes on us and is totally committed to us, period. So that's it, I'm done. And if you have any questions, because I'm sure there will be, jot them down and let me have them, and we'll have a look and see what we can do. Right? Yeah, maybe I should have some conversation one week as well. All right, thank you very much. And we'll see you Saturday evening. And, Eurovision Song Contest. We're going to have hot dogs and stuff, so, get ready to fly your flag for Britain. All right, thank you. Love you all. Bless you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. You can find out more about all the Rock is doing locally and internationally at www.rockofyork.co.uk. If you consider yourself part of our growing global community, then why not support The Rock from wherever you are? Just hit the donate button on our homepage to help us help others.